Did the Canadian government fund Russian propaganda? Has the Kursk incursion run into trouble? And what did the US presidential candidates say about Ukraine at their first, and possibly only, debate? This is week 133 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and I'll be taking you through the top 3 stories from Ukraine this week. There's been a controversy unfolding in the last couple of weeks surrounding this documentary that premiered first at the Venice Film Festival and was supposed to be shown at the Toronto Film Festival, although the controversy has created enough of a security concern that it's been pulled from the lineup for now. The documentary is called Russians at War, and it follows Russian troops fighting in Ukraine, with Russian-Canadian filmmaker Anastasia Trofimova claiming that her subjects were just ordinary guys. So, in order to make this documentary, Trofimova actually embedded with Russian troops who were fighting on the front lines against Ukraine. She claims that she did this without the permission of the Russian Defense Ministry, which is a pretty dubious claim given the Kremlin's absolute control over the press and their often brutal approach to who is allowed to report in Russia and on what subjects and with what access. And it's not like Trofimova was an unknown figure in Russian media before this. She used to work for the Kremlin-sponsored news outlet Russia Today, which is banned in many Western countries for spreading Russian disinformation intended to sow discord abroad. The odds that she filmed this documentary over 6 months without the government finding out about it are very, very low. Basically, the only way that this could be pulled off is with the Kremlin's blessing. So the filmmaker claims that the Russian soldiers she filmed were just ordinary guys with a sense of humor, many of whom didn't fully understand why they were fighting, thus implying that ordinary Russians are as much the victims of the Russian government as Ukrainians are. She also claims that she didn't see any evidence of war crimes being committed on the front. Here's just a brief hint as to why people might have the impression that Russian soldiers are war criminals. Because they've committed 137,000 documented war crimes in Ukraine since February 24, 2022, including mass murder, torture, rape, ecocide, and the attempts to erase Ukrainian history, language, and culture, all of which point to the genocidal intent of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. I'm purposely putting emphasis on the word documented. In the territories that are still occupied, there's no way of knowing how widespread these crimes are. But based on Ukraine's previous experience of uncovering thousands of war crimes in liberated territories, we expect the numbers to be high. Russians have targeted schools and hospitals, shot surrendering POWs at point-blank range, kidnapped and brainwashed Ukrainian children by the thousands. Make no mistake, it's not Putin himself carrying out these crimes. It's the ordinary Russians, like those featured in Trofimova's film. And furthermore, many of the statements made by the film's subjects echo Kremlin talking points. Men who claimed not to know exactly why they were fighting also waxed nostalgic about the good old days when Russia and Ukraine were united, or made claims about denazifying Ukraine. Combined with Trofimova's denial that Russia is indeed committing war crimes in Ukraine, this paints the picture that not only is Russia's war justified, but also that Ukrainian eyewitnesses to the violence are not to be trusted. Again, we wonder why the Kremlin would allow this film to be made. To make matters worse, the film was made using Western funding. It was granted $250,000 from the Canadian Media Fund, as well as $11,000 from the Hot Docs Ted Rogers Fund, a major funder for Canadian documentaries. The film lists the Canadian government as a supporter in its ending credits. It was first shown at the prestigious Venice Film Festival, and was set to premiere at the Toronto Film Festival on Friday, but was cancelled by festival organizers late Thursday night over unspecified security concerns. On the one hand, art is supposed to ask uncomfortable questions and to put its audience in the shoes of people who are dissimilar to themselves. On the other hand, there is undeniably a great risk in amplifying the voice of the aggressor over that of the victim, and to imply that people should hold sympathy for those who, at this moment, are committing genocide with no intention of stopping. To draw a parallel, is it appropriate to highlight the humanity of Nazi officers when remembering the Holocaust? To allow films like Russians at War to gain a platform and audience in the West is to amplify the Kremlin's voice over that of the thousands of Ukrainians it has murdered, who were ordinary people too, just not ones who invaded another country with the goal of wiping it off the map. Russia may finally be pushing back against Ukraine in Kursk Oblast, with unconfirmed reports of a counterattack that saw the retaking of as many as 10 villages by Russian forces. These reports are coming from various sources within the Russian military, as well as open-source monitors like Deep State Map, but Kyiv hasn't confirmed anything yet. In a meeting with the Lithuanian president on September 12th, President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed that everything is going according to our plan in regards to the Kursk incursion, while not denying that Russia is fighting back along the western flank. Although Zelensky didn't go into detail, some experts believe that the strategic goal of the operation was to force Russia to redeploy its forces from other parts of the front, which has been a success to some degree. Both Zelensky and Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky have claimed that tens of thousands of Russian troops have been sent to Kursk, putting pressure on Russia to continue replenishing its forces in the face of mounting casualties. However, what we haven't seen is a significant redeployment of troops from Donetsk Oblast, the site of the most intense fighting this year. In Donetsk Oblast, Russian troops have slowed their advance toward the town of Pokrovsk, but amped up their attacks on Volodar, some 50 miles to the south. Volodar isn't exactly a logistics hub like Pokrovsk. Although it would make parts of southwestern Donetsk Oblast more vulnerable if it was captured by Russians, and could pave the way for the capture of other key towns, Volodar is more useful for defensive and symbolic purposes. It's been a frontline settlement semi-regularly since 2014, and has thus far managed to stay out of Russian hands. Although it used to be a coal mining town with a population of more than 14,000, now less than a few hundred residents remain, and the town is largely destroyed. It was a predictable roller coaster watching the first and likely only debate between Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris and Republican candidate Donald Trump. Trump had no problem claiming that immigrants are eating America's pets. For posterity, I need to clarify that they absolutely are not doing that. But he had a much harder time articulating his position on Ukrainian victory over Russia. In fact, when asked if he thought a Ukrainian victory was in the United States' best interests, Trump hedged and said that he thought it was important for the war to end, with no indication of which side he believed needed to come out on top. He also reiterated the claim he's made a million times about how he will end the war swiftly if he's elected, with no clear plan for what that entails, other than negotiating with Vladimir Putin. I saw a tweet on Thursday from Putin critic and chess player Garry Kasparov, which read, "Saying you would deal with Vladimir Putin by getting along well with him only means that Vladimir Putin has already dealt with you." Trump's elusive statements certainly seemed to back up the idea that his plans for Ukraine involve a victory not on Kyiv's terms, but to some degree on Moscow's. While his opponent Kamala Harris was more vocal in condemning Russian aggression, as she has been consistently, one former advisor to President Zelensky's office pointed out in a comment to the Kyiv Independent that Harris also failed to categorically state that ensuring a Ukrainian victory was in the best interests of the United States. And if you're wondering how Putin felt watching the debate, it's hard to say. He made a tongue-in-cheek endorsement of Kamala Harris last week, which confused a lot of people. On the one hand, maybe he really means it because he thinks she'd be an easier opponent in a geopolitical conflict, but more likely, he's just throwing his unpopular reputation behind her in an attempt to confuse voters. Russian state media sways toward Trump, and the dismay shown by propaganda commentators after Trump's poor debate performance shows that he's still the Kremlin's top pick. So, to recap, Trump wouldn't vocally endorse a Ukrainian victory. No one was very happy with him, but Kamala Harris also didn't give the rousing vow to support Ukraine until victory that we'd ideally like to hear. That might have been the last time that the two will face off before the election in 2 months. Although a Democratic victory feels more possible now than it has throughout the campaign season, it's still not clear who will in the end take the office and how exactly that will affect Russia's war. That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. Your support is what makes our work possible. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this channel. If you'd like to become a member of the Kyiv Independent community, please visit the link in the description below. I'll see you next week.